The meeting of the Public Safety Committee is now called to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Boyd, Alderman Vaccaro,
Present.
Alderman Cone, Alderman Arnowitz,
Here.
Alderwoman Hubbard,
Present.
Alderman Kotar,
Here.
Alderwoman Spencer,
Present.
Alderman Muhammad,
Present.
Alderwoman Boyd,
Present.
Chairman Kennedy.
Here.
8 present, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We're here today and we're pleased that we have a representative from St. Louis Police Department to discuss with the committee the use of force policy of the St. Louis Police Department. They were gracious to agree to come to the meeting here today. We have before us Major Mary Warnecke, Deputy Commander of the Bureau of Professional Standards. Long title. Would you please come forward and review with us the use of force policy, any special orders that were used in its creation, and then after that, we will open it up for members of the committee. Several members of the committee had questions based upon what we see going on today and phone calls and communications from various constituents. So we're here to really kind of get an understanding of how it works. What are these standards and policies around it?
Okay.
The members do have a copy of the special order as well before us. Okay?
Well, you can see it is a pretty large document, but it's a pretty large topic. It's not an easy topic. And the preservation of human life obviously takes precedent over everything. I don't want to read you the special order unless you want me to, but it is the policy of the department that human life will guide officers in the use of deadly force. When it comes to the time of the use of force, one should use the least amount of force needed for the situation, and you escalate it as the situation escalates. Deadly force is revisited every month, if not more, by supervisors with the involved officers. We have CALEA standards, which are the standards in which many police agencies adhere to. It's a professional group overseeing law enforcement agencies. And so every month, all officers have to visit that use of force policy and actually pass a test that's on the computer to ensure that they are up to speed on the special order. It's important to note that deadly force, if that's what we want to concentrate on today.
Yes. We can.
Okay,
Yes, we can
okay.
do that.
Well, you obviously have to protect the officer or others from what is immediately thought of as a threat of death or serious bodily injury. When reasonably necessary, you can prevent the escape of a person when all of the following apply. These are the key things of the deadly use of force policy. When the officer has probable cause to believe that a person has committed a felony involving the infliction or attempted infliction of serious physical harm. The officer has to reasonably believe that the person is armed with a firearm or another item which could cause death. And the officer has probable cause to believe that that person poses a significant threat to the community and human life should that escape occur. Okay, those are the key components right now. We do have other things where you can use your weapon at the discharge of a firing range or at an animal to protect someone, that sort of thing. It's important to note that officers should not put themselves in a position, if possible, to escalate the situation, so that you have to use deadly force, if at all possible.
Now, there is presently what is it called? This order was created in 2014?
It was, but it has been updated as recently as August of this year.
Okay.
It
And all
does
that's-
get updated, all orders get updated periodically as needed.
Okay, all that's reflected in this document?
Yes, sir. Now, a part of this is the Force Investigative Unit. Maybe you have, would you like some information on the
Yes,
Force
would you do that?
Investigative Unit?
That
Okay, the Force Investigative Unit was established to investigate the criminal aspect of officer-involved shootings. They have sole responsibility to investigate those and anything else as directed by the Chief of Police. The Force Investigative Unit has provided or had a relationship with our Circuit Attorney's Office since it began. The Circuit Attorney's Office has a method that they do an independent investigation now, separate from our Force Investigative Unit. To date, we have provided every piece of evidence and/or report as requested from our Circuit Attorney's Office. The Force Investigative Unit is commanded by a lieutenant and 4 detectives. It is their sole responsibility to investigate these incidents.
Okay, we can begin any questions from members of the committee. Alderman Jeffrey Boyd, any questions?
Good morning. Congratulations, Major.
Thank you, sir.
How many police officers are part of the Force Investigation Unit?
We have 4 detectives and 1 commander who holds the rank of lieutenant.
And how many investigations have they done year to date? I know this is about, 3 years old, the unit?
Yes, sir. The 2017 figures right now, there have been 15 Force Investigative Unit investigations, officer-involved shootings in the city. 3 of those involved officers who were shot and 1 officer who was stabbed. Now, we had an officer-involved shooting of a city officer that occurred in St. Louis County that gets investigated by that jurisdiction.
Do they have a unit similar to ours?
I'm not familiar that they do.
Okay. And typically, how long does it take to do these investigations?
I hate to estimate that. I know it takes quite a bit of time, having just left our investigative services division and knowing how long it takes a regular homicide investigation. It takes many months. It does.
Okay, walk me through a situation where there's an officer-involved shooting. Let's say it just happened at 11 o'clock today. What's going on? What's happening? Who's being notified? How is the crime scene protected? Walk me through all of that.
Okay. Well, if an officer-involved shooting occurs, radio is broadcast. First officers on the scene have explicit duties, and it is outlined in the special order. It's about the preservation, first of all, rendering first aid, if first aid needs to be given. It's about the preservation of the crime scene itself. It is a crime scene, so we have the preservation of evidence, witnesses, and any involved parties. We also have to assess whether or not there is still a risk involved, if there are suspects at large. Coordinating that to put out descriptions on the radio. Now, during this time, our real-time crime center has already alerted the chief's office, my office, the Force Investigative Unit to respond for an officer-involved shooting that would be requested by the involved unit. Okay? So the scene is really held by the first responding officers and supervisors until the Force Investigative Unit responds. Once that Force Investigative Commander responds, we assume responsibility of that scene. Okay? Like I said, there's the preservation of evidence that is key, the preservation of any witnesses to make sure that they're still there for the interviews that need to take place.
Okay. And what's the role of the officer that's involved in this shooting? What's going on with the police officer?
That officer is secluded from the scene. We like to put him or her in a vehicle, if possible, to get him away from the public eye and to get him away from the scene. And he or she is accompanied by another officer, and then we prefer to use a sergeant of that officer, of that unit, to convey that officer downtown, where subsequent questions occur. Hopefully prior to leaving, if the officer is not injured and they're able to give a statement, we ask for a preliminary statement. It's a public safety statement. It's what shots were fired, what direction they were fired, did the suspect fire shots, what direction did they fire, were there witnesses, damage, is there anybody still at large? Just to get a basic brief summary of the event. A more extensive interview of that officer is taking place later.
And is there a certain amount of time before this extensive interview is taking place?
There actually is a standard that the Force Investigative Unit has established, and they prefer to have a 2 sleep cycle for the officer. They typically come down with their attorney.
Explain what 2 sleep cycle means.
It means they have the opportunity to have at least 2 nights of rest or 2 days of rest before they give their full extensive statement. They can give more before that, but typically it happens within about two sleep cycles.
And explain the rationale behind 2 sleep cycles. And the reason I ask you that is, I'm just thinking if there's a witness on the scene, you want to get as much information from this witness as possible right now while it's fresh in a person's mind. So help me understand why we have a 2 sleep cycle.
Well, the officer has got to give a public safety statement, which gives the facts of what we need to act on at that time. The officer has to provide where our physical evidence may or may not be located, if we have people at large. So we do have a preliminary statement from the very beginning. Witnesses do get immediate, if possible, interview. We'll bring them down to our headquarters building so we can get a taped interview. Every interview is taped. We have learned it is not infrequent for someone involved in a traumatic event to remember things in phases. You recall circumstances and facts as it plays out in your head over time, and once your adrenaline comes down, after you get some calm, and it's not unusual, whether that be a victim of a sexual assault or the victim of a shooting or a traumatic incident, there's a tendency, and we like to get a statement that is firm, and because if we get a statement today at 4 o'clock, I may remember something a little differently at midnight. Now, I'm not saying I'm fabricating or changing the story, but I remember things differently, and it would look less genuine if I'm altering my statement because I remember things in stages, and it is like common practice.
And help me understand why the officer, after 2 sleep cycles, would need an attorney to give further
This is a criminal
statements.
investigation. We are looking for, is there a criminal aspect by all those involved, whether it's the person who caused that officer-involved shooting, whether it be a suspect or the officer, did they adhere to the laws of this agency?
Would it be reasonable to assume that if you have 2 sleep cycles that you have an opportunity to really prepare, I don't want to say an airtight statement, but you have a lot of time to craft a statement in your best interest? Would that be fair to say?
You could say that, I guess. There is the fact, though, if you give no statement, because they don't have to give a statement.
Okay.
They don't have to. They have to give the voluntary statement. They have to do that, and they have to give a statement to our Internal Affairs Division to see if they violated department policy. That can't be used against them in a criminal proceeding. Okay.
So who is it that they don't have to give a statement to?
They don't have to give us a statement other than the voluntary statement.
Which is the public safety statement?
Yes, sir.
And why is that?
Because they know it's a criminal investigation. They have the right, same constitutional rights as everyone else to self-incrimination.
Okay, let me ask you this. Is it a state statute that is 2 sleep cycles, or that just
No,
department
sir.
policy?
I don't believe that no, I don't believe so.
Okay. And what's your opinion of the police doing an investigation of themselves? How does the public trust the fidelity of the process if we're investigating ourselves?
Well, I'd like to think we had the public's trust, but I know that's not always the case. We can't change evidence. I don't believe we can change evidence. We have witness statements. Everything has to make sense in this criminal investigation. And we are also, we have to recall, we have a prosecutor that is charged with, has taken on an independent role also as an investigative team. There was a time when we were doing it at the same time, but they have since, for a while now, taken it as to do an independent investigation. So there are checks and balances to this system.
Talk to me a little bit about, and I'm not going, this will be I'll try to make this my last question. I don't want to monopolize the time, but so when they were doing it with the circuit attorney's office, so is everything side by side? Was everything side by side, or was there only certain evidence or certain scenarios that it was okay to be side by side, if that makes sense?
This is occurring before I came to this particular role, but I will tell you that they got notified when we got notified, and they had the opportunity to be on scene with us and within the yellow tape at the same time. They have the opportunity to be in the witness interviews at every time. Prior to this year, they have established that they would do it independently. So whether or not they come out at the same time, or whether or not they ask, hey, can you give us that audio tape statement of your witnesses or whomever, those are questions for them.
Okay. Thank you, appreciate it.
Alderman Vaccaro?
I think Alderman in 20 seconds kind of answered all the questions for me.
Alderman Cone?
So, just to be clear, in addition to the procedures and policy that you have for investigating use of force, the circuit attorney is also conducting their own investigation independent of the police department itself.
Yes, sir.
And with the circuit attorney's office, I know at least underneath the previous administration, I'm not as familiar with the new administration, but they had investigators, not just attorneys that worked in the circuit attorney's office, but the circuit attorney's office also employs investigators as well that would be able to perform those functions and not just an attorney.
Yes, sir, I believe so.
And I'm assuming they still have those investigators in that office.
I know they have investigators, yes.
Okay.
What their complete roles are, I couldn't answer.
Understood. So if I may, Mr. Chair, I think it would be helpful maybe if we also, as part of the conversation around the investigation of use of force in the police department, perhaps have our circuit attorney come and testify before the committee as well, to elaborate on what policies or procedures are being used in their office as an independent tool for investigation.
We can do that.
I would really appreciate that, because I think that would be helpful for the community and us as a board to also understand what's going on in that office as well. Otherwise, Alderman Boyd asked a lot of the questions that I had at this point.
Alderman Warnecke?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, a lot of questions have been asked already, and I will hold mine till we get with the circuit attorney.
Alderwoman Hubbard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As everyone has stated, I think Alderman Boyd tapped into a lot of our questions, but I have one specific question. In regards to the number of incidences you all have had within the department where officers have escalated the use of force, not necessarily resulting in deadly force, but how in depth do you all investigate those situations?
If I understand the question, how do we investigate non-deadly force?
Right,
Is that
but
what you're
just
asking?
within-
Just regular use of
Right.
force, for lack of a better
Right.
term? Okay, every use of force has to be, we conduct an after-action review with the officer and their supervisors. First of all, of course, every use of force has to be documented in a police report, and making sure that they adhere to department policy. And regular use of force then goes under an after-action review by the assigned officer's supervisor and commander. They must sign off on whether or not there was a violation of department policy, if there's a training need that should be addressed. So they are all addressed.
And if there is an issue where you all determine that there is a training need, what does that process look like? And how often do they go, and how do you follow up and monitor if they've actually learned something from the training?
Well, it has to be, that's part of their commander's responsibility to make sure that they attend any kind of subsequent training that is required. Our police academy provides typically that training on use of force, and they'll address what needs have to be addressed during the training, and they cover it in that manner.
And what type of needs do they normally address?
It may be how to escalate or de-escalate. We do a lot of de-escalation now. We have learned that the moment an officer puts their hands on somebody is generally going to get injured. Were there other options available For instance, the use of a taser, the use of pepper spray, that sort of thing, and that de-escalate as well.
Okay, I think that's very important that you all are doing de-escalation training, because we hear so much about this level of fear that officers have, and I get it, because they do a very hard job, but how do you really tap into that? I mean, if there's a history of an officer, always saying he's fearful or something, or in many situations I've witnessed myself where I've called the police and they are afraid to get out of the car. As a department, how are we addressing that? Because, I mean, if a person is that fearful, then maybe this is not the job for them, but so how do you all really tap into that? Or if you see incidents where an officer, he made it through the academy, but this just may not be working out for him, how do you all address that?
Well, I think you're touching upon a couple different scenarios. Let me backtrack also regarding any use of force. When those get documented in the police report, they get generated and entered into a computer system. And let's use Mary Warnecke for an example. If Mary Warnecke has 3 use of forces in a short time frame, Mary Warnecke is going to get looked at again and say, hey, what are these now? Am I involved in a unit that does nothing but chase stolen cars and people flee on foot and don't stop when we say stop? Or is Mary Warnecke more of a writing tickets type person, but I keep having verbal encounters and I can't communicate with people? So those things get generated in a new system. It's actually called the Blue Line. And it kind of came online, I want to say about a year ago, and we manage that, and it identifies officers that may be more inclined to be involved in things that we need to take a second look at. And then there's a process to say, hey, is this reasonable? Or does something need to be addressed with this individual? Is it a training issue? Is it a stress issue? Is it an officer that can't handle the stresses of the job? Do we need to address it on a different level? Okay? And then the second part, I think, of your question is, what happens if you have officers that aren't well suited for this profession? And many folks are not. There are indicators that we should all be aware of as supervisors and managers if they're displaying some characteristics that are not what we'd like to see in this profession. And it could be everything from constantly late, their appearance is not correct, their interactions with the community, the calls we're getting, hey, this person is, treated me rudely, and you kind of have to look at the overall officer and address what is going on with that injury. And that's kind of a first line, baseline job for supervisors, is to make sure the well-being of the people that report to them are doing what they're supposed to be doing in a manner we expect. Did that answer your question?
Yes, very well, thank you.
Alderman Coltrane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Major. Congrats. And thanks for your many years of service to the department. I know we've worked together on a number of issues, and when you were in the 3rd District, you were an excellent captain.
Thank you, sir.
You're talking about Blue Line, which I guess is new. Who's responsible for entering those reports? So if there's a use of force, lethal or non-lethal, who enters that into this Blue Line system?
The officer's first line supervisor.
Okay.
It's part of, similar to the report writing process.
So that's usually a sergeant, right?
Yes, sir. Mhm.
Okay. And I might kind of jump all over the place. I was jotting down questions as you were presenting. Talk about non-lethal force a little bit more. I know you talked about officer-involved shootings, but what non-lethal options are available to our district officers and some of our more specialized units?
Okay, well, the first line would always be communication, persuasion, being clear what it is you expect of the individual. From there, it can escalate or de-escalate depending on the individual's behavior. And we have to be just as prepared to de-escalate than escalate. We have options too, so we have certain tools available to us. You're familiar with pepper spray. You're familiar with the taser. We do issue collapsible we have nightsticks, okay? A nightstick can only be used in certain forms on an individual. There's certain areas of the body that it's not appropriate. It's meant to cause a temporary incapacitation of a nerve, of a knee, that sort of thing, that would enable the officer then to take the person into custody. So you can use what's appropriate at the time. We don't say you have to use a taser before you use mace, or you have to use mace, okay? But we do know that if you can't verbally get compliance and you have to go hand-on, that there could be injury to the officer or the individual. Putting handcuffs on somebody who does not want to be handcuffed is a violent and unattractive thing to see or participate in. So, for instance, pepper spray may not be suitable in a closed-in environment or with the number of folks that are around. It's going to affect everyone else. So you have to be aware of that. You have to, of course, be aware of your surroundings. And then it goes up to there.
And are all of our officers equipped with collapsible nightstick, pepper spray, and a taser?
Pepper spray, yes. The nightstick is an option. You have your collapsible kind or
Or the big old wood ones?
the old wooden one. So we have those, they are provided to the officers. We tried to, and I don't want to get this, I don't want to give inaccurate information at all. Whether or not every officer has the taser, I can't say that is
Okay.
accurate. We'd like to have one in every patrol car, say there's 2 officers, but I can't tell you definitively that every officer has a taser.
Okay. But, I mean, those are provided by the department, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so this, I had a chance to read, thanks for providing the special order, the Force Investigation Unit section, which I guess starts on page X1, 10-1. Was this modeled, I know this was adopted in 2014, was this modeled after any other cities? Or, I mean, how was this document, how was this special order developed?
I know the commander of the unit looked at policies from around the country. I know he's been to extensive training. How in-depth of that, I can't provide
Okay,
that answer,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
And the commander of the unit, he's been on the job since this unit was created, right? And to date, do you know how many, I guess, reports his unit has finalized or completed?
I can tell you that for 2017,
Yep.
we've had 15 forced investigative unit officer-involved shootings in the city. Like I said before, we had 3 officers shot in those incidents and 1 officer stabbed. In 2016, we had 12.
Okay.
We have had 37 since its inception.
And so, and I think you covered this earlier, but in an average one of these investigations, and I get they can vary, but on average, how long does it take the Force Investigation Unit to complete an investigation?
I wish I could provide a definitive number of months, but I can't.
Okay.
I know it takes months because we're talking about a huge amount of evidence, analysis from lab work, that all gets compiled in here.
Right.
An investigation is not considered closed until the circuit attorney's office has rendered an opinion.
Okay, and of those 37, do you know how many the circuit attorney has rendered an opinion on that are closed or have led to criminal charges?
5.
5 of the 37.
Yes, sir.
Presumably you've sent more than 5, the department has sent more than 5 over to the circuit attorney's office?
We are waiting for 32 opinions, sir.
Okay. Do you have any indication, I don't, obviously you don't speak for the circuit attorney's office, but do you have any indication, are they communicated to your department when they plan on providing those, I guess, a charging decision or lack thereof on those 32 cases?
I don't have information regarding that they have been either presented to them or when they started doing independent, where they weren't relying just on our investigation,
Right.
they're doing independent. I know we've provided everything they've ever asked for, and I don't have an answer as to how long that would take.
Okay. I think that's all I've got for now. Thank you very much, Major.
Alderwoman Spencer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Major, and congratulations on your promotion.
Thank you.
I kind of wanted, I'm going to jump around as well, too. I took a bunch of notes. First of all, is it typical, or should I say, does every police department have its own internal investigative unit for police-involved shootings?
No, I don't believe every police department does. I think it's a rarity for a lot of police departments.
So when a police department doesn't have its own internal unit, who investigates those incidents, or are they investigated at all?
For other agencies, I couldn't answer for them, ma'am. You know, whether or not they do it internally themselves, if they rely on their prosecutors for their county or state, I couldn't answer for all the many agencies that are out there.
But under your understanding, it's unusual that our police department has its own investigative unit.
I think it is a building practice that agencies have a separation from who normally does investigations to have a more specially trained division of their agencies.
So you mentioned there's 5 members on our unit here. How are those members chosen?
There are 4 detectives and one lieutenant, and the lieutenant would be chosen by the chief of police or the deputy chief, that sort of thing. For all police officer positions that become open, there is a process. The job gets posted, that any applicants who meet the qualifications should apply. They apply. If they meet the qualifications, they have to have so many years of investigative experience, so many years on, that sort of thing. And then they get interviewed by the commander of the unit, Force Investigative Unit, and he can choose to have others in that interview with him, like I believe just recently he used the other detectives in the unit, so it was a joint, not just him, because unfortunately there is no sergeant in the unit at this point. Mm-hmm. I know that's been discussed, but I don't know that there's been a decision on that. And then if they meet the qualifications and go through the interview process, they select a member, and that name is provided to the chief of police for transfer.
And are these typically officers who've been on the force for a long time, or are they new officers? How does that, are the qualifications such that it's typically, officers who've been around the block?
Unfortunately, I don't have the job qualifications. I don't know if it's 3 years or 5 years investigative experience. Thank you, Ron. 5 years investigative experience. Okay.
And the officers who are serving in this unit, is this a long-term position, or is there a lot of turnover? Is this something that is kind of a career move that you're going to be serving in this capacity, or is it a kind of you do it for 6 months and move on?
We would expect that they would be there long-term, because we invest in many specialized units. They get a lot of training, extra training to go to. And so it is a big investment for our folks when they're in specialized assignments, not just FIU. And so you hope that they would stay in the unit. Now, the rank of patrolman, detectives are the same as a patrol officer. So they get the opportunity to apply to be promoted. They take the promotion test, and actually we've had a member of the FIU team get promoted. So he left the unit. And then hence there was an opening, so you post the job again, and you wait for candidates to apply. They meet the qualifications, and you start the process again.
Is there currently any diversity on the unit?
Right now, there are 3 white males and there's 1 white female. The individual I mentioned who got promoted was an African-American male.
Can you describe some of the policies regarding conflicts of interest within, so for example, if you have a member of the unit who may be charged with investigating a member of a family or a former colleague, thank you. Something of that nature. What are the conflicts of interest that describe how a particular member of the unit might be excused from a specific investigation?
I don't know if that has occurred. I could see where possibly we are an agency that we're a small city, mm-hmm. and the detectives that are assigned to the unit do have some tenure. Mm-hmm. So, of course, they're going to know colleagues that could be engaged in this, but that's where supervision and command come into play. Each incident that occurs is given to one primary FIU investigator. There are others serve as support roles. If that primary says, hey, that's my brother-in-law or that's my old partner, we would accommodate that would not be the case. We'd choose another primary investigator.
Cases that are investigated of the 37, I see here on page X1 that there's quite a bit of jurisdiction or discretion in what investigations are chosen. So I guess it looks like anytime a weapon is, anytime a suspect is struck and or critically injured or any incident directed by the chief of police. So are we investigating other than striking suspects, or is it just pretty much just police-involved shootings where somebody is pretty critically injured?
Where we strike, where there's actual impact with the weapon, we do those. We do in-custody deaths as well. We could do something along that nature, which may not be a firearm, but the suspect may be in custody. We've done those. Sometimes homicide has done those. In the previous administration, it was established that as directed by the chief of police, and that's where it stands still today.
Is the list of cases being investigated by this unit something that is publicly available?
Not until the investigation is considered closed. And as I said before, we have to wait for the opinion of our circuit attorney's office.
So then, in order to close a case, it has to not only be closed by the investigative unit, but go over to the circuit attorney's office, where then it is open and pending until the circuit attorney closes it.
Because we don't know if they're going to decide, hey, this warrants criminal, there's a criminal aspect here on the part of the officer, so we want to take action in that regard.
And are all cases, all 37 cases, all cases investigated by the unit turned over exclusively to the circuit attorney's office, or do any cases get closed in other manners?
The Office of the Circuit Attorney did send out, I believe, one case, this previous administration of the Circuit Attorney's Office. I think there might have been considered a conflict, so they sent it to another prosecutor in another jurisdiction for review. Otherwise, they're held with our Circuit Attorney's Office, if that answers your question.
So the decision to go somewhere besides the circuit attorney's office is not the decision of the unit or the police department. In other words, all cases that go to the unit here leave the unit when completed, when the investigation is completed, and go to the circuit attorney's office for further action.
Yes, ma'am?
At that point, when the case is closed, is not only the list of the cases, but is any special report made public, to your knowledge?
Attorneys, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. The Circuit Attorney does provide a written document saying they reviewed a case and their findings, yes.
And
we do have those for the 5 previous cases.
And are any of the findings from the force of use unit included in those findings? In other words, is any of the work that this unit is doing made public at any point?
Any work that the FIU is doing, is it made public? It would be public then once we have those opinions from the Circuit Attorney's Office.
I think it might be useful, Mr. Chairman, to have an example of what that looks like. You've mentioned that this policy has changed in the last year. Is there a when a change to this policy is made, is there any public aspect? Is any of that made public? Does the public become aware that this policy has changed in any way?
Let me show you. You have a copy of the special order, but I'm pretty sure it's probably a black and white copy that was made. You might see some graying in the area, and on my original copy it is in yellow. That indicates changes to the special order. Anything in yellow is a change or update. Okay. So, and these are all public documents that are released to media and the public at any given time.
So anytime a change is made, there's a notification to the general public that a change is being made, like a...
I can't say there's a notification to the public, ma'am, because we update our special orders. We could get notifications of an update every week, or it could go a couple of weeks. We frequently update them. Sometimes the update might be something as changing the name of our divisions. We've changed the names of our bureaus of recently. It could be something as minor as that, or it could be policy change.
Would you say that you change this policy more than 10 times a year?
Oh, no, ma'am. No.
It might be worthwhile, Mr. Chairman, to have some sort of notification process that alerts this body or the general public on policy changes particular to the use of force. My last question is sort of specific in that, well, I think this does it for my questions for right now, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Thank you, Major.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like Dr. Clark, you were interested in getting an example of what now?
What a closed report would look like and the information gathered by the force of use investigative unit and what that typically looks like, just for our general knowledge.
And I do believe that is a public document.
That completes you? Alderman Muhammad?
I have one quick question. Well, no, actually, I have two. Earlier, when you were speaking about tasers, so an officer does not have a taser grip on that person in the car.
No, the taser is to be worn on their duty belt.
Do they have the option of not wearing that taser to their discretion?
No, sir. If they're provided a taser, it's expected that they would wear that taser. They would have that taser on their person.
Okay. Now with the particular FIU, what lieutenant colonel do they report to?
Lieutenant Colonel, out of the Bureau of Professional Standards, is Lieutenant Colonel Rochelle D. Jones.
Okay. Has it always been that way, or is that something that just happened? Was that just ratified?
She was recently promoted, as was I, but she was in the, she had my position. She was the deputy commander, and she reported to Lieutenant Edward Kuntz, who has since retired. So she moved up with her promotion. She took over the bureau as bureau chief.
Thank you, Major.
Yes, sir.
Alderwoman Boyd? Hamlin?
Congratulations, Major Warnecke, and I did work with you in 6th District, so.
Thank you, ma'am.
My question that I have is twofold. It's two questions. I was looking on here when it was saying about the post-shooting drama, serious physical harm, and all the aspects that you have of it, but I didn't see any, my brain went dead.
What page are you on, ma'am? And I can.
I'm on the table of contents.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, and so it's the section 8. And so I was looking at that. So do you all have anything that shows that has any sensitivity training to teach the officers how to work with the different races of people that they're going to interact with out in the community? Because I didn't see that.
Okay, well, that would not be a part of this document. Our training needs are the core training that we have is post-training, police officer standards training. It is a state requirement that we cover different aspects every year. It used to be every 3 years, and this is the first year. We have to meet certain training aspects, so many hours every year. And included in that will be tactics, law, diversity, crisis intervention, how to interact with the mentally ill, those suffering from a mental illness. So we have different requirements that we meet with post to ensure that we meet all the training requirements that the state wants.
Okay, and then the other thing is with the police-involved shootings, and I guess, and maybe I was off and I didn't pick up on it, but you said that you have the circuit attorney's office does an investigation and you all do an investigation. And so when you do those investigations, you give the circuit attorney all the information, all the data you all have collected, and then they come down with the final decision.
Yes, ma'am.
So I guess what I'm looking at is, would it be more feasible to look at having an outside person investigate the police department on those issues than the police investigating themselves?
I think we're quite qualified to investigate because we have oversight at so many different levels. Everyone is treated as a criminal investigation, and it's presented to our top prosecutor in our city, who do an independent investigation as well. And they can draw their own conclusions, and then we have the option of the grand jury and all those things. We also have an internal affairs division who investigates any policy issues, separate from the criminal investigation. They do not do the criminal investigation. Okay, so I think we are quite qualified to do these investigations. And we do have outsiders looking at it, and I call them the circuit attorney's office.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
We do have other members of the board who are here. I'd like to see if they have any questions. Alderwoman Davis?
Yes.
Any questions?
Thank you, and congratulations to you, Major. I enjoy working with you when you have part of my ward.
Thank you.
For me, process and procedure is very important. And sometimes people don't have the correct information to understand what that is. And so educating the public, I think, is critical, and there's a lot of unknown. And when there's a lot of unknown, people get themselves in different situations that didn't necessarily need to happen. And so when I listed all these different things that you guys talked about involving the Force Investigative Unit, I went back to a time when we had some pretty questionable and severe cases involving officer shootings. And I remember that we had outside investigator on a federal level for several of them. And I can't remember the name of that department. And I wanted to kind of explore that opportunity again, that maybe it would happen on a regular basis. I don't necessarily want it to go to the Attorney General or somebody like that. I prefer a federal level because that to me is probably the opportunity for us to have the most separate and unbiased entity to work on this. So, U.S. Prosecutor's Office, something like that. I remember.
I don't recall.
What's his name? And he's not here anymore. Was it Richard Callahan?
We had Richard Callahan and
Yeah.
then before him.
Yeah, and the guy before him, I know he got several cases that he helped us with investigations on. And so maybe that's something that we can look at again internally. And it's something that we have to do because we are now locally controlled, and earlier all the state policies that were in place, we haven't had a chance to deal with all of those. And so it would be helpful with our new circuit attorney to help us resolve some of these issues and put everybody in a better place. I don't say that the police department can't investigate, but I think it needs to have a cutoff, and that might be it when it's officer-involved shootings. That might be the cutoff for those investigations, and then that goes somewhere else. So that's a policy I think that we probably need to look at as a body if we're going to get to the bottom of this. I wanted to ask you also, when you talked about the 37 cases, most of those cases, did they become a case because of a complaint or just because of the action that was taken and you guys chose to investigate some of them? Do you have any idea what numbers?
Those are all Force Investigative Unit investigations, meaning there was an officer-involved shooting.
That's it?
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
that's what I wanted to know on that. I was looking here at, under civil disobedience, and you talked about the different definitions, and it's something here that says skirmish line. Is that the same as the kettling that took place last weekend? Is that the same action, but just with a different name?
Bear with me 1 minute.
It's under number 12, civil disobedience, multi-jurisdictional unified command.
Right, and a lot of that is about the actual working with other agencies when we have a large-scale event, that unified command, okay? And then I want to say it is different than the kettling. I don't have a department definition for kettling.
Okay, because it
I'm afraid.
kind of sounds like it might be. Okay, and then my last observation here is when we have a lot of these incidents come from the attempt to apprehend usually turns into a chase that usually turns into deadly. So I thought we changed our policy about chasing people, number one. And then secondly, if someone's leaving you, what imminent danger is that?
Okay. One of your first points was a lot of these stem from a chase. I can't say that that is the case on a lot of these. They could stem from a call for service, okay, a domestic call for service. It could stem from someone being called in for suspicious occupants or just a car stop of that sort. But yes, we do have circumstances where there was maybe some sort of a chase. Our pursuit policy has not changed, and our policy regarding fleeing felons and the use of deadly force is spelled out in the use of force order. And there are certain criteria that have to be met, and they all have to be met. They should all be met, and that is, and to sum it up, to prevent the escape of a person, these all have to apply. The officer has probable cause to believe that the person committed a felony involving the use of a firearm or attempted infliction of serious physical harm, and the officer reasonably believes that the person is armed with a firearm or another item which can cause death, and the officer has probable cause to believe that the person poses a significant threat to human life should escape occur. So those all have to apply if we're chasing somebody and we choose to use deadly force.
So not necessarily just the officer's life, but the public.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I thought I had my last, I'm sorry, I have one more. When we are, when we're dealing with these chemicals,
Chemicals?
yeah, and I'm talking about pepper spray, gas, mace, all of that. It appears as though there has been some training that it has to be applied more directly. Is that because you want it to be most effective? And the reason I say this is I'm in neighborhood meetings and people are saying, I saw on TV where somebody walked up to these people and just, 6 inches away from their face, spraying pepper, and they wanted to know, was that required?
Well, I wasn't on that scene. However, there are guidelines about how we should use this pepper spray, and there are the individual canisters that an officer carries on their person, and then there are the large canisters that are used for civil unrest and protests. And they should only be used when certain things apply. When a commander on that scene has authorized the use of that, okay? We've given orders to disperse, and we have criminal acts occurring, okay? Now, that set of circumstances, it sounds extreme. I don't know. I didn't see that on the media, though, so I can't fully comment on that.
Okay. Well, I guess we have a lot of work to do, and mainly we need to educate the public. If we have a lot of people who are upset for various reasons with public policy, governance, and all of that, somehow there needs to be an understanding of the rights of protesters. And it has to be a good understanding on both sides, and how we interact with each other. And so what I'm most disturbed by is the fact that there is no understanding. For me, there's no understanding. I respect the police, I respect the law, I will support the police 100%. To have an adequate police department that protects the citizens of the St. Louis. But in turn, I can't say that it's okay for you to do anything you want to do, first of all, to another human being, and then to our public safety folks, because it has just kind of gotten out of order. So I'm just trying to figure out, how do we educate people to know what their absolute rights are and how to conduct themselves so they don't come in harm's way? No, the escalating situations are unnecessary, because I do believe people have a right to protest. If they want to protest all day and all night, every day, that's okay. It really is. But it's not okay for people to be harmed on either side. It's not okay. And then I worry about the innocent people, most especially in the last couple of days, that have been harmed innocently in all of this. On one side, because the protesters wanted to get their message across, and then on the other side, because the police are trying to have order, and innocent people get caught up in it and get hurt. So, we've got to do something different. And I hope all you guys are thinking about it. I know we're thinking about it, and we need to come to the table and sit down and figure it out on behalf of this community. Because if not, all of us are at fault. And I'm not saying you're to blame, I'm saying we are to blame as well. So I'm just hoping we have that opportunity, and that we can get a level of respect to move forward.
I welcome that opportunity, ma'am.
All right, thank you.
Before we go back through other questions, members of the committee, Alderwoman Ingrassia.
Good afternoon, Major. Nice to see you. Thanks for taking some time with us today. Can you explain to us what the police department has done subsequent to the Ferguson Commission's Forward Through Ferguson report, recommendations on use of force?
Okay. A lot of lessons were learned, I think, from Ferguson, and how to handle protests, civil unrest, free speech. We recognize that everyone is entitled to their First Amendment right of free speech, and they can voice that opinion in a peaceful and lawful manner. And we have tried to share that we recognize that, and I think we've demonstrated that on a lot of these nightly events where they take over street. Now, taking over street is not necessarily lawful, but we've given, hey, to get the ends, we want to make it as peaceful as we possibly can. So we learned that, hey, we have to provide an avenue for people to express their First Amendment right. And we recognize that and acknowledge that. When things become disruptive, when they become unlawful, we also learn things as well. That we have to give folks the means to leave if it is an unlawful protest and it is an unlawful gathering that is turned violent and criminal, then we need to make announcements. And we are doing a complete review of recent events, of course, and but we want to give people the option to leave the area. We give them fair warning. We learn, and a lot of this came from the Ferguson and subsequent reports from there, that we also have to announce when we're going to use these munitions of the pepper spray. Okay, and if at all possible. Now, if it is a dynamic where the bottles are thrown on the officers, and the officers that have since have multiple injuries for officers, things do turn dynamic very quickly. But when all reasonable means are available, we will give those warnings, give those dispersal, let them know that gas will be used, give them an avenue and the opportunity to leave.
Okay, I had actually asked about use of force, but
Sorry.
That's okay, we'll flip-flop, because I was going to ask about what you just answered as well. So in 2014, the Don't Shoot Coalition met with the police department and came up with rules of engagement. I know that Alderman Kennedy, on behalf of the Aldermanic Black Caucus here in mid-September, reminded Chief O'Toole what the agreement was and the list of agreed upon items that was then incorporated into the October 2015 Forward Through Ferguson report, which recommended a demonstration response plan for civil unrest, for demonstrations. Is that something that's been discussed about how to implement at the police department to date?
I know there were significant number of meetings on how to handle the expected unrest. I can't say that I was a part of all those meetings.
Okay.
Okay.
I guess I'm concerned specifically with kettling and then media and legal observers and some excessive force issues. And if you can't speak to that, I will follow up with the chief.
Yep.
With respect to use of force, can you speak to any of the recommendations in the Forward Through Ferguson report being discussed or implemented at the police department?
I can refer to the special order. Everything is outlined in the special order that we touched upon, both lethal and non-lethal use of force.
Okay.
So it's all incorporated there, I believe.
Okay. Do your officers receive cultural responsiveness training?
We used to say cultural diversity,
Mm-hmm.
and we have had that training throughout the years. An actual outline of when the last class was, I have to get back with you on that.
Okay, but it's not like a requirement for folks going through the academy or an ongoing continuing education
We
type of-
definitely do that in the academy, in the police academy, and we also talk about cultural differences with our CIT training, which is our crisis intervention team training on how to better interact with the mentally ill. And a lot of those cultural diversity issues from CIT cross over to the general population.
Okay. Do your officers get trained on how to recognize the impact of trauma?
I can't say that we do. Now, we talk about trauma care, but it's more on the emotional level a little bit in some of that CIT training.
Okay. And can you articulate the training that your officers receive on implicit bias?
All the commanders went through implicit bias training, and then it was to filter down into the other officers. I'll have to tell you what that timeline was. I know I went through it a year, 2 years ago.
Okay.
I'll have to provide you that information later.
Okay, is that a requirement then of all the officers to have?
I know we had hoped to do it.
Okay.
How that panned out, I will find out.
Okay. And then what are you doing to ensure that your officers are continuing to be mentally capable of handling their jobs? They're obviously dealing with a very dangerous situation on the streets. I think everyone here in this room wants to make sure our residents are safe as well as our officers, and I do have a concern just based upon what they're seeing every day, what the requirement is for them to be mentally healthy.
Thank you for recognizing that. We established a permanent position within the agency within this past year called it's a sergeant position. It is a CIT, Crisis Intervention Training, / Officer Wellness position. So this sergeant coordinates all the CIT training for the officers. I had been doing that, and so it's nice to have that help. And how to work with our mental health providers, how to work with our community mental health liaisons, and everything we learn for how to help with the community transfers over to how to help oneself and your family members. And the reason it is a / officer wellness program is because we've recognized that there is trauma. It may not be a physical injury, but it could be emotional trauma to just like our victims in the community who are suffering child abuse or shootings or see a shooting, see a family member get harmed. They are suffering a trauma, and so are the officers. So we've during this last session of unrest, we brought in and encouraged our employee assistant people to be on site, and then we've also provided some other resources for the officers.
That's great. I think this is the last question on, have you been aware of any conversations had within the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department or at the state level on establishing a use of force database to be used statewide to sort of be able to fine-tune and make better decisions with respect to how police officers are interacting with the community?
Can't say that I'm aware of that, but
Okay.
kind of new to the position right now.
Mhm.
So are you saying that's in place?
No, it's just one of the recommendations.
Okay.
I'm just sort of going through the Ford through
Okay.
Ferguson report.
Okay.
So, well, thank you for your time. I appreciate your service.
Thank you, ma'am.
Alderman Boyd, you had a follow-up question?
I did. Thank you. Alderman from the 6th Ward did a good job, taking them away from me, so I don't have as many. But Major, I would have to say there are a couple incidents that have occurred that are kind of disturbing to me and disappointing. And I'm wondering, as we look at training, especially diversity or looking into racial biases and different cultural understanding, I heard you say that the commanders took the training. And I heard you saying you'll get back with who was all involved, but down to the low level, the police officer themselves, how's that training transitioning from the commanders down to the police officers if they didn't go through those several hours or so?
Well, I apologize that I don't have the information of how it filtered down to the officers, in what manner and in what capacity. That's something I need to get an answer for you. Like I mentioned earlier, with our post-required training, we have certain criteria that we have to be engaged in, and we have to meet those qualifications, so those certain training hours. And I do know in the past we've always had racial diversity as a required block of training for every officer, every rank.
In order for us as a city to be able to bridge the gap between the citizens and the police and the legislative body and administration, we're going to all have to cooperate. Circuit Attorney's Office also involved in making sure we craft some policies that are in support of everybody, and that it's pretty much a level playing field. Two of the incidents that I'm very disappointed about is, number one, an officer-involved shooting where an officer shot another officer, while two officers were already handling the situation, and trying to wrap my arms around why or how that could have happened if you already have officers on the scene who are managing the situation. The other one is how an undercover police officer could be brutalized within this protest march, that happened recently. And I'm just going to be honest with you and candid with you, and I'm not trying to play a race card, but they were both African Americans. And I just wonder if we have a serious issue with race relations within the police department. I'm disturbed that the judge would write in an opinion that if this person was a heroin dealer, then chances are he had a gun. Because if I was a police officer, I would interpret that as, chances are he has a gun and I need to be ready to use deadly force. Now, let's say the probability that he may carry a gun is high, but it's not absolute. So I am really looking forward to us being able to seek first to understand our cultural differences and how we can manage that and make the city of St. Louis a better city with our law enforcement, with our elected officials, and with our citizens. And I look forward to what happened, in these two incidents. How is it that a police officer, get caught up, swept up, and disrespected and brutalized, and how an officer can end up not being part of a scene and shooting another officer. That's just very disturbing with me. And I'm hoping that we're learning from those situations. I look forward to someone telling us these are the lessons learned, especially from this verdict that we received, which has pretty much divided our city. And everybody's entitled to their opinion, but at the end of the day, we all need to settle down and figure out how do we move forward, because I'm certainly looking forward to how do we move forward and make St. Louis a better city. Is there a cadre of commanders that are working on lessons learned and how we can do things better?
I agree with you on so many levels. And yes, there is, you can actually call it an investigation on both of those circumstances that you presented. The most recent one, and then when our officer was shot by another officer. Those are horrific events. And we don't want to see that happen. And we are looking into it. There is an investigation into that. And I welcome conversations on how to bring our city together. Because as a city resident, I want our city to be together. But yes, rest assured, it is at the command level, addressing off-duty officers and their engagement with a situation that presents itself, to the officers that were on duty and what presented, and then also the most recent where an officer was injured during the protest. How did that happen? Why did it happen?
And I am very concerned also about the health and well-being of our police officers after they take somebody's life, especially if they're being shot at themselves. And I'm curious as to how long do we give them rest before they return back to duty? Because that's a serious situation.
I'm sorry, an officer who was involved in a shooting is required to be off a minimum of 3 days so that they can see our department health provider and psychiatrist, and they have to be cleared before they can come back to work.
So it can be as short as a few days?
It could be as short as a few days. It could be much, much longer.
Is there a time where it's been weeks before someone returns back?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. And they do get paid while they're?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much. Appreciate the follow-up questions, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any other follow-up questions from members of the committee? I do see two additional older people, Ogilvy or Gunther. No questions? Okay. Well, we thank you. It appears as if we have asked all the questions we have right now. If I can clarify something, though, before we release you. The qualifications of the members of the Force Investigation Unit, they have special qualifications or training other than, can you tell us just a little bit about it?
Well, they have to have 5 years investigative experience to be eligible for the unit. And then once they're in there, they do get some training on evidence and interviewing. Okay, it depends what's available at the time and what their baseline experience is when they come into the unit.
And they're selected by the chief?
Eventually, all transfers are selected by the chief, but they go the process through their commander, who then submits the name for transfer and goes up to the deputy chief, in this instance, Lieutenant Colonel Rochelle D. Jones, who approves that and then forwards that to the chief.
And their findings, does that go up to the chief, or what do they do after they finish?
No, the investigation is signed off by the lieutenant of the FIU unit, and it goes to the circuit attorney's office for review.
All of them automatically go
Yes,
to
sir.
the secretary?
They had been until they decided to do an independent review, and they don't want our investigation. They're doing their own independently.
Do they make any, so all of their investigations would automatically now go over to the circuit attorney's office?
They have been, but
they don't
now
have
they
any-
stopped until
Oh, okay.
they say they want to do their own independent one. And so they could ask us, and have asked us in the past, hey, send me this tape, send me this interview, send me this lab report. I can't say that they've asked for anything of recently.
Okay. Okay. I'm trying to just make sure I get it clear. So can the chief stop an investigation that they're doing?
That FIU is doing?
Yes. Because the order says they do this, plus the chief can direct them to do other stuff.
Do other investigations.
Right, can the chief
Yeah.
direct them not to do an investigation? Just asking. There's never.
I doubt that. I don't know that he would, I guess the chief can do whatever they want to do.
Right, I got
But
you.
I've never heard of that set of
Have that happen.
circumstances, yeah.
And
I mean, we have somebody probably injured.
Right.
We've discharged a fire. It would go against every policy that we have.
Gotcha, okay. And before this unit was created, who did these investigations?
The homicide unit did the investigations.
Homicide. So if there's an officer involved shooting.
Sorry, if I could expand
sure.
on that. If a member of the force investigative unit is involved in a shooting, homicide would then do the investigation. It would not be about, FIU would not do their own investigation of a member.
Right.
Okay.
But
And the
before this-
homicide unit is under a completely different bureau and leadership.
But before this unit was created, when there was an officer involved shooting, who did the investigation?
Homicide division.
Homicide, okay. All right. I don't believe there's any other questions. That completes it for me. We thank you very much for coming.
If I get information as to our implicit bias training or racial profiling training, what we have established, would you like me to forward that?
Yes, would you?
And I'll send it to you, sir?
Yes.
Very good.
Okay.
Just want to make sure I follow up.
All right. Thank you again.
Thank you all.
I appreciate it. We do have our circuit attorney here. She came to just listen today. We will set up a time for you to come before the committee, and she has graciously agreed to do so. So we'll do that at a subsequent meeting. Okay? With that, that completes our agenda for today. Thank you very much. Our meeting's adjourned.